There's a piece of iron hanging from a power line tower in the California mountains. It's shaped like the letter C, a C-hook. Its job is simple: hold a high-voltage wire, 115,000 volts, to the steel tower. The hook was installed in 1921, 97 years ago. For nearly a century, every time the wind blows, the hook swings, and every time it swings, it grinds against the steel hole it hangs from. Metal scraping metal, back and forth, thousands of times, millions of times. The friction is wearing it down. What used to be thick, solid iron is now a fragile, rusted sliver. And this morning, the wind is screaming at 50 miles an hour. The hook snaps. The high-voltage wire drops. It swings wild, slams into the steel tower. A massive arc of electricity flashes. Sparks and molten aluminum rain down into the bone-dry pine needles below. The brush catches fire instantly, and with 50-mile-an-hour winds behind it, the fire doesn't spread. It explodes, moving at the length of a football field every second. Directly in its path, the town of Paradise, California. 27,000 people. By the end of the day, 85 people will be dead. 14,000 homes will be reduced to ash. An entire town will be gone. All because a multi-billion-dollar corporation refused to replace a piece of metal that cost about $1. I'm James Tudor. This is The File on the 100-cent hook. PG&E is a monopoly. If you live in Northern or Central California, you don't get to choose your power company. You buy from PG&E, or you sit in the dark. 16 million customers. No alternatives. They operate over 100,000 miles of transmission and distribution lines. A huge portion of that grid runs through some of the most remote, rugged, fire-prone terrain on Earth. Maintaining a grid that massive requires constant vigilance. Steel rusts, wood rots, trees grow into power lines. The Caribou-Palermo line, the one that sparked the Camp Fire, was built right after World War I. The engineers who designed it assumed the parts would be routinely inspected and replaced when they wore out. But over the decades, something shifted inside PG&E's San Francisco headquarters. Wall Street investors didn't care about century-old towers in the mountains. They cared about quarterly earnings, stock prices, dividends, and in a monopoly, the easiest way to inflate your profits is simple. Stop spending money on maintenance. PG&E executives weren't ignorant. They had the data. They knew their infrastructure was crumbling. State regulators required the company to conduct detailed climbing inspections of high-voltage towers, send trained linemen up hundreds of feet to physically examine the hardware for wear and tear. But that's expensive. Paying specialists to hike into remote mountains and scale massive steel towers costs money. So PG&E found a shortcut. Instead of climbing inspections, they started doing patrols. They'd fly a helicopter past the power lines at high speed. An inspector would glance out the window, see that the tower was still standing, and check a box. From a helicopter moving at 50 miles an hour, you can't see a few inches of wear on a dark iron hook suspended hundreds of feet in the air. It's physically impossible. But here is the most damning part. PG&E already knew the hooks were failing. In 2012, 6 years before the Camp Fire, a nearly identical iron C-hook snapped on a different PG&E transmission line. It failed for the exact same reason: a century of wind-driven friction. PG&E fixed that single broken hook, but executives made a fatal choice. They completely failed to order a system-wide inspection of the thousands of other century-old hooks on their grid. They knew the exact mechanism of failure was a ticking clock, but sending climbers up every tower would have devastated their profit margins. So they looked the other way. In the years leading up to the fire, the company routinely falsified maintenance records. They delayed critical repairs. They pushed the grid far beyond its safe operating limits. And what did they do with the millions of dollars they saved by not replacing rusting hooks and rotting poles? They paid it out. In the decade before the Camp Fire, PG&E diverted billions of dollars to shareholder dividends and executive bonuses. They were cashing out the safety of the grid. November 2018 was terrifying in California. The state was locked in a brutal drought. The forests were bone dry, essentially giant piles of kindling waiting for a spark. Meteorologists saw a massive wind event forming and issued a red flag warning, the highest level of fire danger possible. PG&E had a safety protocol for this exact scenario. It's called a public safety power shutoff. If the wind gets too high and the vegetation is too dry, you cut the power to high voltage lines in dangerous areas. A dead wire can't start a fire, but shutting off the power means losing revenue. It means angry customers calling in, bad press, politicians complaining. PG&E executives looked at the weather models. They knew winds were going to hit 50 miles an hour. They knew their century-old towers were rusting. They knew the forest below was ready to explode. They even sent out automated warning calls to residents, telling them the power might be shut off. But they never pulled the switch. They decided to risk it. They kept 115,000 volts flowing through 97-year-old iron in hurricane-force winds. When the hook snapped at 6:15 a.m., the people of Paradise had no warning. The fire moved with such terrifying speed that it consumed the entire town in a matter of hours. By 9 a.m., the sky had turned pitch black. Daylight disappeared. People tried to flee, but the fire jumped the roads. It trapped them in gridlock. Cars packed bumper to bumper, flames closing in from all sides. Some people burned alive in their vehicles. Others abandoned their cars and ran through tunnels of fire. 85 people died. It became the deadliest, most destructive wildfire in California history. In the aftermath, investigators hiked up into the mountains. They found the Caribou Palermo Tower, and lying in the dirt beneath it, they found the piece of iron that caused everything, the C-hook. It wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't an act of God. The investigators noted that the hook had worn down so significantly over the decades that failure was entirely predictable. It was a mathematical certainty. Someone should have replaced it years ago. It would have cost about $1. The fallout was unprecedented. Facing tens of billions of dollars in liability from thousands of victims, PG&E did what massive corporations do when they get caught. They filed for bankruptcy. It was a legal shield, a way to protect their assets while they negotiated settlements with people who'd lost their homes, their businesses, their families. Eventually, in a historic courtroom moment, the CEO of PG&E stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter. A billion-dollar American corporation admitted that its deliberate negligence killed 84 people. But because a corporation is a legal entity and not a human being, nobody went to prison. Not one executive spent a single night in a jail cell for burning an entire town to the ground. PG&E paid fines. They restructured. They emerged from bankruptcy. And to pay for the massive legal settlements, they successfully petitioned the government to raise electricity rates on their customers. The people of California ended up paying for the disaster that burned their own state. The campfire is a reminder of what happens when critical infrastructure is owned by a profit-driven monopoly. It proves that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a bomb or a weapon. It's a rusty piece of iron hanging by a thread, waiting for the wind to blow. I'm James Tudor. This is Empire Archives. Subscribe.